All right, let's talk about our next word, which is the Council of Trent. As we can see up there from our Wikipedia information, which is right, the Council of Trent was held between 1543 and 1563. It's 18 years, pretty long council. And it was held in northern Italy. And basically, this was part of what is called the Catholic Reformation, or the Counter-Reformation sometimes. If we look at it, the Council of Trent was basically where Catholic leaders got together and made a united response to the spread of Protestantism that was going on in Europe. There were many other people like Martin Luther, like King Henry VIII in England, who started his own Anglican church, Calvin, who started a religion called Calvinism, that were spreading over Europe, and they were getting away from Catholicism, which, was not good for the church. They were losing people. So in the Council of Trent, they first decided that to make sure that the priests were more highly trained, that they were more educated. They also decided to basically tell people like Martin Luther, who were breaking away from the church, and other Protestants, that they were committing heresy or going against the church, and that basically they'd be going to hell. They also started the Jesuits, who will we talk about next, and being that we're a Jesuit school, this is pretty important. Also, the Jesuits were major advisors in the Council of Trent, and they also decided to spread the Catholic faith to new lands around the world. And this will become very important. Places like India, in the Americas, the Catholic faith will then be spread to many other places around the world in more of a missionary sense. And this will help spread Catholicism. Protestantism will kind of do the same thing. But the Council of Trent is basically the Catholic Church regrouping, trying to basically get their faith back down, and it is a response to Protestantism, very historically significant, as it is the Catholic response to Protestantism with the Jesuits, with spreading to new lands as well. All right, well, let's talk about the Jesuits. The Jesuits are an order in the Catholic Church. They were an order started by a guy right over here. That would be St. Ignatius of Loyola, who was a Spanish aristocrat, a knight who liked to fight, and then he got shot with a cannon. Well, part of the shrapnel hit his leg and broke his leg. And then he gave his life to God and went to Rome and decided to make an order with his friends after he went to university. And they basically wanted to spread the word of Jesus. Originally, they weren't going to be, the Jesuits really focus their faith on the spiritual exercises, which is a way of praying, looking more internally, trying to connect the scriptures to your life. We do this every day in our school with the examen, almost every day with the examen. It is a very large order of priests that try to do good works around the world. Jesuits today are very famous and significant for their schools, Cristo Rey, which is one of them. Anything with the name Loyola pretty much is Jesuit, or Xavier is pretty much Jesuit. We see universities, and they spread education. They didn't want to be going to education at first, but they decided that going into education was, people wanted their prayer. They wanted to know how they were reading, because the Jesuits were so well trained and so well educated that people wanted them to build schools, and they started doing it. And they ran them pretty well. And I think we run our school pretty well too, quite personally. We look here, our current Pope is a Jesuit. So the Jesuits in this time period, why are they so significant? The Jesuits are significant because they go out and they spread. Ignatius Loyola and others have debates against other Protestants, and basically they kind of throw down here and they say, okay, let's look at our faith. Let's look at Protestantism versus Catholicism. And they're out there. They're with the people. They're trying to help people. They're helping people pray. And they become some of the best missionaries for the Catholic Church at this time, in the early modern era. Okay, the Virgin of Guadalupe. The Virgin of Guadalupe is a perfect example of syncretism. We had an indigenous man by the name of Juan Diego. He had obviously taken a Spanish name at that point. We have an indigenous man, Juan Diego, who found himself between two cultures, between his native Aztec culture and also between the new Spanish culture that was coming in with religion. he was a Catholic, which meant that he was going against some of his indigenous beliefs, and some people on the indigenous part did not like him for that. And he wasn't fully accepted by the Spanish as a Catholic, so he was a man who really found himself in the middle, but he was a very good, holy man, without a doubt. So Juan Diego saw the Virgin Mary who came to him, and this is, if you're a Catholic, we believe this is true, that it happened. If we're looking at this from a historical perspective, we'll just give you the argument of what happened. So the Virgin Mary comes to Juan Diego and basically tells Juan Diego that she's here, that they should have hope, his people are going to be okay. Juan Diego takes this news back to the church, and the people of the church don't really believe him. They don't think it really happened. So he goes back out and he sees the Virgin Guadalupe again, and she tells him to bring these flowers that are growing. When it's not the season, the flowers should not be growing. And that would be the proof. Well, he goes there, and inside of his cloak, whatever we want to call it, his clothing, when he gathers those flowers, and when he opens them up and brings them, there is the image of the Guadalupe there that all can see. They bow before the Virgin Mary on the image of Juan Diego, and that you can see this image often if you go into a Catholic church with a large Latino population, especially a large Mexican population, you'll see this image, and this is the image of the Virgin Mary with came. So this was seen as a miracle, and after this image happened, millions of indigenous people began converting to Catholicism. And there's also on the indigenous church, Guadalupe shows syncretism with some of the native beliefs, and more so seeing that like the belief that all things were created by God, so that for the native people that they could combine some of their indigenous native beliefs into Catholicism. Today, the Virgin Guadalupe is definitely a religious symbol, but also a symbol of patriotism for many Mexicans, as it has become a national symbol of Mexico, as much as the flag or any other symbol in Mexico to this day. So very significant for the conversion of many Latinos, especially Mexicans, to Catholicism, and is seen as a source of pride until this day. Lastly, here would be an image of what Juan Diego may have looked like when he presented the flowers, and then the Virgin Guadalupe was on his clothing. This clothing that you can see is actually in the Basilica Guadalupe, which is in Mexico City today. My wife and I were fortunate enough to be able to visit that last summer. So there I am right there. And there's my wife, who's much prettier than me. All right, let's go to the next one. Voodoo, also known as voodoo, is another example of syncretism that exists. And it's a syncretism involving Catholicism, but also involving a lot of traditional West African beliefs. So voodoo was a way for especially many of the slaves who came to the island of Haiti and other islands in the Caribbean. Many of them took elements of their traditional African culture and combined it with elements of Catholicism, especially elements associated with the saints. And they combined it to form a new religion called Voodoo. Voodoo spreads and grows throughout Haiti with a very, very large African slave population that is there forced mainly to produce sugar, some tobacco and other products, but sugar was the big money maker that the French, who owned Haiti, were taking advantage of and using their African slaves to make money off of. So the cash crop sugar was why the African slaves were there. They mixed their African elements of their religions with the French, who were Catholics, and became the religion of Voodoo in Haiti. In the next era, this will become real big because Voodoo will become a religion that will be associated with rebellion and revolt against the French when Haiti does become the first independent republic in the Caribbean and in the New World. Like Voodoo, the religion of Santeria came to rise in the island of Cuba for many of the same reasons. It mixed a Catholic faith, which came from the Spanish, who took over Cuba, And then with the African slaves, many of them who were brought there as slaves, again to produce products, mainly sugar was the big cash crop moneymaker, and tobacco, they combined their beliefs in syncretism and created the religion of Santeria. Santeria, again, blends elements of Catholicism with native indigenous beliefs and is still practiced until this day in Cuba.